Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for a new Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone is doing good. It is Thursday, Thursday morning at 9:48. So I've been getting around to doing these videos I've been wanting to do as of late, which has been fun. I've been kind of wanting to do videos like where I'm taking some movies that I just really, really love, and I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive and talking about, you know, those elements that make these movies just so terrific. I mean, because when you think of all the ingredients, I've said it many, many times before that to me the greatest form or the medium that I think represents like the greatest form of artistic expression, and it's also the hardest to just do and to complete, is the art of filmmaking. It's it's so complicated. I remember seeing an interview a long time ago with Ridley Scott, and he was talking about kind of comparing the whole process to trying to making a film to kind of being like a general in a war. And it's kind of accurate because you know you're multitasking. I mean, every person who is doing some kind of artistic expression or endeavor, to a degree, you're always multitasking. Whether it's painting or performing music or recording an album, writing a short story, because you're thinking of a narrative, you're thinking of characterization and bringing color to that particular work and making it kind of stand out. So you are always multitasking it. But with filmmaking, it's literally multiple jobs all at once. And I just feel like when a movie gets made, it's kind of a miracle when it actually gets done, when you think of it, because of all of the time, all of the craft that's put into it, the talent and the love and the passion. Because when you think of like what the general or or the director of the film of that particular movie, what they're having to take on and think about all at once, it's monumental. You know, I have the reason my perspective changed so much, and it was an experience that made me love film even more, was I have a little bit of experience as a filmmaker myself. Where I had worked on many years ago. I worked on doing these like a series of these music videos for a band that I was in, and then also on my own, and then also like worked with an actual director whose his job was to to make these music videos on a more professional level. And then I also like threw my hat in the ring to try to direct a film, and I did a little short film a long time ago, and it was insane. Like, it was so incredibly hard to do, and that film that I ended up doing was only like 20 minutes in length. It was a short, and it was it's a piece of shit, but it was a fun experience, and it was super hard, and I learned a lot. But the biggest thing that I got from that experience was that it gave me a whole new, like, profoundly deeper respect for the art of filmmaking. Realizing, you're essentially climbing Mount Everest every day. And I think it applies to whether, it's a big budget kind of production or a small budget production. In some ways, I think doing a smaller production is harder because you don't have the luxury of a bigger budget. You have, less a lot less time and flexibility as far as when to shoot and where to shoot. And so and because of that, you have to do things quick and you have to work pretty fast. And as a director, you're worrying about, well, the casting, making sure you get all the right actors, that have the right chemistry, the script writing, which is probably the most important part of it, to the story. You have the editing of that film. You have the effects design for that particular film. You have the costume design of that film. You have like the location scouting is a very very big part to shooting a film. I know in my rinky dink little movie that I did years ago, I spent, more time actually like getting clearance and more or less locations scouting than anything else, really, because I spent, weeks, because I remember we had to use, uh, it was a small group of actors. Some of it was shot here at the house, a good portion of it was, and then we shot in Belfast. We shot like on Main Street, and then we shot inside a restaurant that was in Belfast, or that is in restaurant in Belfast, Darby's. So there was a lot of things to kind of worry about as far as that goes, because we shot the movie, the scenes that we did, we shot while inside the restaurant while they were actually open. So it was, getting all that together, and it was a lot, and trying to find the right spot, the right space, and then of course what today's show is going to be about is, I'm going to be talking about, well, it's one of my favorite exploitation giallo films, and it's also one of my favorite soundtracks. So it's going to mainly be about that. So on top of all those other things I mentioned, you have the film score. I mean, it's that really. I mean, when it comes to me personally, especially when it comes to my band Quantum, that's the biggest influence. Movies are the biggest influence for the band, without a doubt. But the music is first and foremost, like soundtracks from all various kinds of movies are. That's the biggest, definitely the biggest, influence. And then there's all those other things that come into play too. And really too, I remember seeing a documentary about the the process of how long it was and how kind of painful it was to edit and put together Alien, the original. Like I just brought up Ridley Scott, but the original '79 version, when everything was shot, how it took forever to cut that movie and to put it together and to assemble it. And they had the experience of where they had a cut that was ready to go. They screened it for some people, and it didn't play well at all. Even though they knew they had fantastic footage, fantastic performances, all those things, and everything looked just, fantastic and beautiful. They knew they had all that, but the editing was not right, and the cutting of the scenes was not right. So it made the movie feel incomplete. So in some ways, editing is like, I don't know, that might be at the end of the day the most important part to make the movie, somewhat cohesive or really cohesive. And when it comes to like exploitation movies, that's one of the things that happens that often isn't technically done right, I guess you could say, or technically sound, because sometimes you'll watch one of these movies and there's like a key, area of the film where you're getting this information and you're really into it and along for the ride, and then suddenly it cuts abruptly, and you're like, wait, what the fuck? And it's like, could if the movie wasn't so fun and ridiculous in other circumstances, it would probably take you out of the movie. But in the context, a lot of the times in the world of trash, trashy cinema, it does work. But so today I'm going to be talking about the soundtrack to one of my favorite films from 1971, The Strange Vice of Miss Wardh from Sergio Martino. This is one of my all-time favorite giallo films. Such an amazing film by Sergio Martino, a legend in the world of exploitation movies, Italian cinema, and especially giallo films. He did throughout his career. He made lots of tons of giallo films, and he's most well known for that style. But he made all kinds of other genre films, all exploitation movies. This release was put out by Severin. I've been watching a shit ton of Severin movies lately. Yeah, I watched another giallo film from Severin last night. I realized uh, kind of last night that wow, I have more Severin titles than probably anything else. I have a lot of Mondo Macabre too. I have a ton of their movies. Mondo Macabre is my favorite, but Severin is pretty amazing too. I don't know. I'd say it's hard to say. I think Severin might be the most like popular, if you want to call it that, as far as as far as their releases and their kind of popularity. In the area of 4Ks, they've really moved into releasing all kinds of 4K. Really, all kinds. They've been putting all kinds of 4K releases out, Blu-ray releases. They're probably the most prolific, but Mondo Macabre is my favorite because they really take a deep dive in the seedy side, in the dark, underbelly of cinema. But Severin's amazing, and so this disc and collection that Severin put out is absolutely incredible. There's all kinds of great special features on here that are just fantastic. The transfer of this movie is just jaw dropping. One of the greatest giallo films. Just love this movie. It's so awesome. And if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend. I've done multiple shows on this movie, but the reason I'm doing the show on it is because, which is something I really miss and I haven't seen in a while. A lot of these Blu-rays that I've gotten over the years all come with the soundtracks, and this came with the soundtrack. And The Strange Vice of Miss Wardh, the soundtrack for this film, is one of my favorites. It's incredibly haunting. It's very melancholy. It's very dark. It's very atmospheric. It's one of my favorite soundtracks, really of all time. It's definitely one of my favorite giallo films, giallo soundtracks. And the thing, unfortunately, that I don't see enough. I haven't gotten any movies. I should say I haven't gotten any films in a long time that come with the soundtracks. About 2 years ago, there were so many movies that I got that had the soundtracks with them, and so I do have quite a few. I remember like a few that I remember that I got, and I have the soundtrack for one of the greatest slasher movies, Pieces. I have the soundtrack for that. I have the soundtrack for The Strange Vice of Miss Wardh. I have The House by the Cemetery, The Warriors of 2049. There's a handful of other movies, but it was so cool because, again, I love soundtracks. And I love this music from the 70s, particularly especially with giallo, but in general with all of the great fantastic horror films. I love a lot of jazz. I listen to a lot of jazz, and my favorite style of music is electronic music. And so that's one of the coolest things about these soundtracks is that, especially with giallo, there's a lot of jazz elements to a lot of this music. There's a lot of lounge um, style. There's lounge music is kind of that schmaltzy jazz based music that is heard in many of these giallo films. Very jazz based. There's a lot of cool melodies. It has this very kind of melancholy vibe, and then on the electronic side, a lot of these film scores have, well, there's a lot of funk influence as well, and a lot of 70s funk. There's a lot of psychedelia incorporated in a lot of these great soundtracks. I'd even say, too, there's a lot of kind of avant garde at times put into the music, put into the mix. Also, classical, ambient. And then when it comes to electronics, a lot of these soundtracks are really, really influenced by the sound of a lot of the early synths that were coming out in the late 60s into the early 70s, when kind of electronic music was starting to kind of emerge. And so a lot of these soundtracks have very much an electronic quality, which again, that's a no-brainer for me. So like, it's kind of a cool combination of elements of jazz, elements of ambient music, elements of electronic music, and also elements of like 70s kind of funk music. So super, super cool. And I'm a big fan of, again, of I just did a show on another show on the practical effects designers for Burial Ground, which is my all-time favorite zombie movie. And that soundtrack is absolutely incredible. I uploaded a show on that as well, and that soundtrack has very much an electronica, psychedelia kind of vibe. And this soundtrack, again, I have this soundtrack on CD, and I just love it. And the composer for this movie was Nora Orlandi. Just tremendous. She her no her I guess Nora Orlandi was kind of like her stage name, also known as Joan Christian. She was an Italian pianist, violinist, soprano vocalist, and composer, and she also was an actress. Pretty amazing. Again, the strange vice of Miss Wardh is one of my favorite soundtracks, and Nora Orlandi's soundtrack is absolutely gorgeous. She was very prolific in her like incredible career. This was what when I got this movie. Probably I've had this movie for probably like 2 or 3 years, and I was super excited because it came with the soundtrack, and I instantly fell in love with the music. I mean, it's very haunting, very atmospheric. It's beautiful. It's kind of terrifying at times. I'm a huge fan of when it comes to music. I love a variety of different things. I really love. I mean, I think it's true. Like variety is the spice of life. I love music that has a lot of variety. I'm a big fan um, of melody. I think melody is really key. If you have a really good, from a compositional standpoint, if that writer or composer has like, and it doesn't have to be, you have composers or writers that write incredibly complex music, very lush, and then you have stuff where it can be very minimalist. It doesn't really matter um, whether it's complex or not. I think if a melody is good and it just has this quality that like if you hear a melody for a song or for some piece of music, whether it's something complex or not, it's gonna resonate with you. It's gonna get under your skin, and it can be something that you can sing on your own. It will get into your heart and mind. And it can be the simplest little melodic kind of passage, but that can be so powerful. And this soundtrack very much has that because it really is. I love what Nora Orlandi did is it just has Like again, I love music when it has variety, just in general. I love it when it takes you on a journey, and I love the I'm a big fan of juxtaposition. I love things that happen to you as a listener where it's a surprise, and it will take you in many different directions. You know, you might have a composition or a song or a tune that has a very meditative quality, which this soundtrack does. Nora Orlandi knocked it out of the park with this soundtrack, and there's all these great mysterious elements of, again, and that's a big trope or characteristic of giallo films. Is essentially giallo films are murder mystery films. You know, I think of it. You know, sometimes again, when I was a kid, I saw giallo films, but I didn't know what that term was. I didn't know, um, I wasn't aware of Sergio Martino as the director. I remember seeing a handful of these movies as a kid, and I always loved them. And I remember they left an impression on me as a kid because I had also seen the films by Lucio Fulci and Mario Bava, Bruno Mattei, um, Dario Argento, of course, all Italian directors. And I remember, in the mix, seeing, and those films are way more, I guess, like horror based, and more emphasis on really gory practical effects. And I remember in the mix seeing a lot of the, giallo films, but I remember, and I knew obviously they were different, in that these films weren't so full on like horror experiences, but they definitely had elements that I saw in the other films. The like the Lucio Fulci films of where there was, you know, um, dark themes explored. There a lot of the times in giallo films there are characteristics that we do see and later got to see more and more of in the slasher films. Like you always have like the gloved killer. The killer is never revealed until the very end. There's usually in some giallo films too. They are very very nasty. There's a psychosexual element. There's the killer always uses a razor blade, and there's always some kind of twist, surprise ending. You usually don't know who the killer is until the very end of the film. They're sometimes excessively gory, which is amazing, and there's a lot of kind of gratuitous sex. But the key component of a giallo film is the murder mystery, and so a lot of this stuff when I saw these movies, I loved that it did have this violent aspect to there was a big violent aspect to a lot of these films. They were very dark, mysterious, but they were obviously very different. Like seeing say Friday the 13th as a kid, and then seeing say like The House by the Cemetery, and then seeing a giallo film, obviously very very different. But they all fit in the same world of exploitation. They're all like very low budget. They have this very real huge strong emphasis on creating this heightened kind of reality, especially with giallo films, because you see that giallo films typically also have the use of really extreme kind of heightened lighting. There's a lot of beautiful shots, beautiful cinematography, big and bold colors, and that goes for like the fashion, the costuming, and in particular the cinematography is usually beautiful and gorgeous. And it's kind of the Italians' version of it wasn't until much much later when I was like, oh wait, that's those films are called giallo films, okay, and for the most part, it's kind of the Italian um, version of like your classic kind of Agatha Christie murder mystery story. That's how I usually think of it. Where there's always a murder mystery involved. There's a series of characters. There's a protagonist and an antagonist. There's usually some kind of plot that involves women getting killed or people getting killed. We don't know who has done it. The killer typically has um, typically wears leather gloves and uses a razor blade to kill people. There's usually some kind of sleazy sexual component to it, often a psychosexual element. There's usually some kind of there's usually a lot of suspense. There's always a kind of detective aspect. There's usually either characters in the story that are police officers that are investigating these crimes, and then there's usually, that's one thing. One of the things I love about giallo films is that they don't really you don't get the big reveal early on. I mean, sometimes in like American slasher films, you sometimes in American slasher films, you know, for the most part who the killer is, and giallo films typically avoid all of that, and you don't usually find out until the very very end, which is often this big giant payoff. And to me, that's really one of those things that give the world of giallo films, or like what makes giallo films so unique and interesting. And I think they are also very influenced by Alfred Hitchcock. Brian De Palma also was, I think, very influenced by a lot of giallo films. There's always like Dress to Kill. I think that feels and looks like a slasher film. Plus, it feels like a giallo film. So, and Body Doubles, another one. I mean, very very much influenced by giallo films. And I think a lot of the Italian directors were very obviously very influenced by Alfred Hitchcock. But when it comes to soundtracks, and definitely when it comes to giallo films, the Strange Vice of Miss Wardh is absolutely incredible. It's also one of those soundtracks that is so strong. You can just listen to it like you would uh, any album. It's just really awesome. It's super atmospheric. It's one of my it's definitely one of my favorites. It's probably I don't have. I wish I had more giallo soundtracks on CD. I don't really stream music. I listen to music on Bandcamp when I'm checking out a band, but I'm a CD guy. I do buy cassettes. I actually have a really good working tape player, but the quality of tapes and the lasting power for tapes is kind of shit. And CDs don't last obviously as long as they used to, but I do listen to CDs the most. I listen to a lot of music like in my car, and then in my I have multiple CD players, and I actually have a stereo. So the soundtrack for this movie is just awesome, and it's something I've listened to to no end. And Nora Orlandi is just amazing. But I wish I was able to find more movies that had soundtrack components, because I haven't seen it in a couple of years. But she's made some incredible movies, so many movies that she scored the music for. Johnny Yuma in 1966, Double Face in '69, $10,000 for a Massacre in '67. A lot of these movies I haven't even seen. A lot of westerns. Um, the Sweat Body of Deborah in from 1968. I mean, these are all old school movies. It's great. A lot of westerns, and I got to check these out. Vengeance is Mine, which I actually have seen. That movie is awesome. I actually have that. I do believe I did a show on that. It's a great western, huh? Clint the Stranger in '67. Prey Vultures in '72. And the interesting thing, one of the other things I meant to say and talk about was I got to see the Kill Bill, the whole bloody affair movie or movies a couple of weeks ago, and it was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. There was probably, I did a big show on my whole experience, and it was just so awesome. And so it was back to back movies. It was Kill Bill 1 and Kill Bill 2, and there was an intermission. It was about 5 hours, the whole experience. There was a 15-minute intermission. And I talked about this in that video, and it was a very different, it was such a different experience this time watching the Kill Bill movies. I mean, they came out quite a few years ago. I saw Kill Bill when it first came out in the theater, and then I saw it a second time, and then when Kill Bill 2 came out, I saw that twice in the theater, I do believe. Kill Bill, the first one, I I've seen so many times. I used to rent it on DVD. I've seen it probably like 10 or 12 times. And then Kill Bill 2, I've only actually seen, for whatever reason, I've only seen maybe 3 times. Considerably less. I don't usually watch that movie like by itself. If I was going to watch it, I'd have to watch it with Kill Bill because I feel like it's real. It just makes more sense that way. It's a standalone movie, but I think it just is more fun and enjoyable if you watch both of them. So, but again, I had not seen those movies in a really long time. I got Kill Bill on Blu-ray a few years back, and I was super bummed. It was a defective disc. Like probably after an hour into the movie, it's all scratched and you can't. It was all fucked up. So, and then I also have Kill Bill 2 on DVD. Obviously, need to get a serious upgrade. But the thing that was so wild about this experience, and I talked about it in the show that on seeing the whole bloody affair, and I'm gonna dive into it a little bit more, was all of the references of all things exploitation. Like again, I've always known. I mean, even I think it's pretty clear, but I think even for people out there that might not have, taken that dive or deep dive, either it's casual, it can either whether it was like a casual experience or somebody who just really loves that form of cinema, it's pretty obvious, that 70s, 60s, all things exploitation were a massive influence, or are a massive influence on all of Tarantino's films. There's all these references. There's, stylistically, the music, a lot of the periods that a lot of his films are set in, just even like the way it's shot, the music, everything is taken from all of these classic exploitation movies, and uh, big time kung fu, obviously for Kill Bill, like all of the classic kind of Asian martial arts movies, probably being the biggest. But throughout his career, like I've always been aware of that, and he's always talked about his deep love and obviously his insane knowledge of all of these like really obscure films, and whether it's spaghetti western films, sex exploitation films, slasher films, giallo films. I mean, you name it. I mean, just the sky's the limit. And so that you always see that, whether it's Jackie Brown or The Hateful Eight, Django Unchained. I mean, Pulp Fiction. I mean, the influence of exploitation movies is such a big part of his whole world building. And it was really interesting because, again, I've always loved those movies, and I grew up seeing them and loving them. But it wasn't until, the last handful of years of where I, proactively went out and bought a shit ton of those movies, which has made me just even well, it's just made me fall madly in love with the genre. So, and in my time, in my free time, like, because typically I watch a movie every night, at the end of the day, and I watch movies on the weekends and stuff, and I average usually one movie a night or one movie a day. But most of the time, I mean, I go to the movies fairly often, and I do love big budget Hollywood, quote unquote normal movies. But I naturally love the sleazy underbelly of cinema. I love exploitation movies. So typically when I'm home, that's mainly what I watch all the time. Whether it's a slasher movie or a giallo film or sex exploitation movie or or western. It can be anything within those genres. I'll watch, and that's typically what I watch because I just find that they're really fun and they put me in a good mood, and they're just really exciting and they're just like ridiculous. And it's the best way to kind of forget about your problems for a couple hours. It's fucking great. It's so healthy. I think it's therapeutic in a weird way, and it's very it's just the best form of escapism. So I've been watching so many of these kinds of films, and I watch them all the time, and trying to collect as many as I can. So seeing Kill Bill after really taking a much more deeper dive into this world, all the references to exploitation cinema and seeing it in the Kill Bill movies it was all it was so much more obvious and blatant and kind of augmented, and it just like all of these references to all of these movies just was magnified to me. It was wild. It was really interesting seeing it in this context after really kind of taking a much deeper dive in the world of exploitation. Really wild. Like I could see so many influences, so much more. I don't know. In some ways, it gave me it provided for a more enjoyable experience in a lot of ways. Some people might say, well, because again, that has always this all of this cinema has always been a big um, influence, obviously, on his work, on Tarantino's work, and you could say that. Well, maybe it could go so far the other way because so many of these things are so obvious. Maybe the film or films don't seem quite as original as when you first see them because you're seeing, oh wow, he's like wearing all of his influences, which are amazing and awesome, on his sleeve, but they're not. It's maybe not quite as original as you first thought. But I don't think so. I think what he does is he proudly, wears those, wears his love on his sleeve for those films. But he does something different. He puts it in a very different context. He takes the genre or genres and kind of messes with it, messes with your expectations, and he does take things in a very very different direction. And so I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. But watching Kill Bill, it was like, wow, I saw the obvious spaghetti western influence. Obviously, the biggest one being Asian, um, Hong Kong action movies. But I saw like elements of slasher movies. There's one scene in particular which I never thought uh, I would see in the movie, but there's one scene in it where it totally reminds me of, wow, I think he got that from a Lucio Fulci film, The Gates of Hell. I was like, it was like kind of obvious. And then I saw all of these Giallo references that I never saw before since I've been watching a lot more of those. And so there were so many different components. And when it came to the soundtrack, the thing that was this film score, which again for Kill Bill, the Kill Bill movies are awesome. But when it comes to the strange vice of Miss Wardh, there is actually the same music is actually used in Kill Bill 2, like literally. And I was just like, oh fuck, that's crazy. And I was like totally blown away by that. And it was totally Nora Orlandi's score that was used in Kill Bill Part 2. And I was totally taken back by that. And I was like, wow. So, because I had seen the Kill Bill film before this film, and that was how I heard the music. So it was like, holy shit. Taking it back, taking it back. But what an incredible film. One of my favorite soundtracks. The Strange Vice of Miss Wardh, composed by the fabulous Nora Orlandi. Check out anything she's done, any of the movies that she has composed music for. Amazing stuff. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.